this doesn't break anything. Should be good. And then,
So we have one question. So we can take our time like last week accordingly.
did this work?
All right, practice run.
This is one question.
Cool. I think it's live on the page. Welcome if you're tuning in live on Facebook. Welcome to webinar, the second webinar in the distance learning series. Chris, China, and Jimmy are all back again to share some awesome tips and techniques for how to better manage your time during distance learning. So without further ado, I will let them all get right into the good stuff. Who's going? I think you're muted.
Thank you so much for joining our webinar. I think if one of us don't say, can you hear me, or I'm muted, then that probably wouldn't be a webinar in today's age. But thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us. So we are Accelerate, and what we do as an organization is that we nurture every student for success by bringing together the best of learning technologies with personal learning coaching skills for parents, students, and schools. And we take what already works in teaching and learning, such as human-to-human interaction, modeling, and coaching, with the latest tools in learning technologies, which has great quality curriculum, data analytics, and so on. So let me just spend a few minutes introducing myself and the panelists. So Chris is our founder, or co-founder and CEO, and she has over 20 years experience as an educator and mentor for youth and guided college-bound students for 10 years. And she has served on boards of several missions-oriented organizations. China is one of our most experienced academic coaches who train and directs other coaches among many of her talents and achievements. She has served in the US Navy, and she has worked in a classroom as a mentor and tutor refugees. I myself have also over 20 years of experience working with the youth and got my master's degree from Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I currently work as an education consultant, also working with Google as an instructional designer. But what brings us all together is the fact that we have a passion about supporting our students and children and their families to provide holistic support to help them realize their full potentials and their dreams. So before we get into today's content, which is about time management, we wanted to talk a little bit about the framework for the e-learning and how students develop. Now, students nowadays have been kind of thrown in to e-learning, and our families are also facing a lot of challenges as well. And furthermore, many schools and teachers are also going through, again, a learning curve of seeing how they can transfer the classroom learning into online. And I think many different schools have different degrees of challenges, as well as families and students. But what it does is it really creates a lot of confusion among the students, a lot of stress and challenge for the parents, and schools feeling overwhelmed. But we at Accelerate tries to deal with these things, and that's what a lot of the seminar that we are doing is all about, trying to break down those challenges and give you very practical, hands-on action items to take to overcome the challenges over time. And what we have done is we have built good learning habits across 4 domains, and we have identified 20 learning habits that will help across these 4 domains. And we aim to change being confused to having clarity for the parents and the students, and changing stress to peace of mind, and being overwhelmed to feeling being more in control with your own learning. So let's look at how we approach accomplishing these goals. What we have here is what in educationese we call Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And what it is it kind of tells the lower and the upper levels of the types of learning that we have. Now, as higher up we go, it requires higher order thinking, but it doesn't mean that the lower order thinking is not necessary. The lower level is important and essential to building knowledge at higher levels. And there are no shortcuts. You cannot not remember things and then apply or analyze them. So really building up your knowledge through the taxonomy is really important. And the reason why we start with this is knowing where your student is and where the student is struggling with is so useful, because then we can scaffold their learning or help them figure out what they're struggling with and help them get to the next level. But we cannot let our students stay at only lower levels of learning, and we can make use of any learning, including e-learning, to help the students build the learning habits and practices that will help them get to the next level. And that is the goal that we have at Accelerate, to equip the students and the parents to help the students develop independent learning skills. So we want our kids to be self-directed and independent learner. We want our kids to have increased confidence, and we want our students to gain more meaningful and better learning. And that is the outcome that we have seen over and over again with the students that we work with. And not to scare you as parents, but this has far-reaching implications on the students, not only in school, but throughout their life, because we see many jobs that are becoming obsolete due to advancement in technology. What places and roles do our students, and frankly us as well, have in the career and in this world? And we need to leverage the information age and the digital age capabilities to train our students to eventually get to and focus at the top 2 tiers of learning, which is something that only humans can do, at least for now. So how does this break down and apply to online learning? Is the understanding and remembering are kind of like the content consumption. It's like the traditional learning and e-learning, where kids would read something online, watch a video, but pretty much they're learning in isolation. And the focus of that is just information, regurgitation, rote learning, focusing on facts and steps, and just solving a bunch of problems. But even online learning, as we do in class learning, we can make that much more effective by bringing in the social learning aspect and the peer-to-peer interaction aspects. And what we do well at Accelerate is we coach the students beyond tutoring. And the difference is tutoring is where you're just showing the kids how to do 2 + 2, but coaching is to walking along with the students and letting the kids really think through the problem and struggle with it, make mistakes and learn from them, so that they can get to that place on their own. And using online learning to connect and create their own content and learning is really important. My professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education, her name is Karen Brennan, she talked about 3 C's of media. And I think the 3 C's can be applied to online learning as well. We can use media and e-learning for consumption, which is just blindly watching and consuming the media. And this would fall under the lower levels. And but we can also use media for connecting and for creating. And that's the challenging tasks that requires collaboration and creativity among the students. And we want to help the students get to that level. So going back to the webinar at hand today, where we focus on time management, let's talk about why time management is so important. And we'll talk about we will talk about the applications of these principles throughout the rest of the webinar. But we wanted to cover this so that you have all of these on hand, and so that you can kind of identify, oh, this is the part where this principle is being applied in very practical ways. And we want to give you the ability to look at that so that you can go beyond some of our practices and maybe even share the practices that you do with your students so that we can learn from and benefit from one another. So the first principle of time management that I wanted to talk about is the fact that time is a limited commodity and resource. There are opportunity costs to everything. So if I spend an hour on one activity, the cost of doing that activity is not just 1 hour, but it's everything else that I gave up in order to do that. So it's really important for students to learn the value of time, that if you spend it, then you cannot get it back. And not only that, the things that you have to do have definite timelines and deadlines as well. And Chris can probably talk more about this, but for example, we consult students with college and how to prepare for college. And there are certain things you have to do at certain years. Otherwise, it's too late to get back to those many times. The second principle of time management is the fact that time is relative. It seems to go much faster when you're having fun and you're engaged. So balance of doing what is fun and meaningful on one hand, and finding fun and meaning from what you're doing is really important. So it's not just about doing things that are fun, but having fun with what you are doing. I know that's a little more abstract, but this ties in with motivation and how to really engage the students. So we'll see how that plays out later. The third principle is, this one might be surprising for the parents, and the kids hate this, to be honest, but boredom is not a bad thing. There's so many, we parents often have a tendency to save our kids from potential problems or hardships, which is a discussion for another time. But our tendency to save students is also true when it comes to our kids being bored. There are numerous academic studies that conclude that boredom is actually a desired quality often, because that space nurtures and often sparks one's creativity. So parents, it's okay to let your kids be bored. You can tell them that Jimmy gave you permission, or we gave you permission to say to your kids that it's okay to let your kids be bored. So let them find a way to be on board or deal with that boredom, rather than dictating what to do for them. Fourth principle is the fact that multitasking is a myth. Our brains cannot multitask, but instead it switch tasks instead. So what we do is, instead of thinking about two things at the same time, we switch our attention between the two. So, but every time you change your attention from one thing to another, it takes extra effort, time, and brain power to do so. So to help us illustrate this point, we're going to do a quick activity. So hopefully you can follow along. Maybe get out a piece of paper. And this is an activity that if you don't have time to do it, or if you cannot do it right now, you can actually do this with your kids. I did this with my son, and he got right away why switch tasking and seemingly multitasking is not such a good idea. So first activity is time yourself. And when I say go, write California, which has 10 letters, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 by alternating letters and numbers. And when you're done, you can check out how much time you have spent on it. So for example, you would write C1, and then A and 2, L3, and so on. And you'll notice that this is very hard to do, first of all. Oh, not very hard, but it's relatively harder to do than the next activity, which is writing California altogether, and then writing 1 through 10 altogether. And you will see that this is much faster in terms of time, and you probably would do it without really thinking as much, and it will take you less brain power to do so. So try this out with your kids. My son said that, oh, I'm gonna be very helpful for my friends, and I'm gonna have a meeting going on with him, and I'm going to work on my homework, and then anytime he has a question, I can help him with it, which is a very noble thing to do. But then, we talked about, how that continues to switch his attention from one thing to another. And then so I had him go through this exercise, and he suddenly understood, wow, switching my attention, it is hard. He was so adamant that he could do it. So instead, the solution we found was that he would schedule time to spend with his friend to, they would each work on certain things and then spend time together unpacking it together and make time for it. And that worked out much better. So going back to the principles of time management, the last one is the fact that how you spend your time shapes who you want to become beyond just what you want to do. It really is an insight into your priorities, values, and productivity. And I know this one is not like the other ones because we're really talking about, I guess, more abstract thoughts. But this one is especially challenging for me as a parent because this is something that I need to continue to model for my own kids. So for example, when I schedule a time to spend with my kids, and you may think it's weird that I have to schedule time to spend with my kids, but what that means for me and for my kids is the fact that I'm blocking off time that is free from distractions and other things so that I can fully devote and focus on my kids. But when I do that, it is a reflection of my own goals to be a good dad and a reflection of the fact that person-to-person relationship building is something that I value and that we value as a family. So I hope that these principles of time management has been helpful for you as well. And we'll see how these things really come into action, as well as the Bloom's taxonomy of learning in our day-to-day coaching of our students when it comes to time management. So, Chris?
So as a continuation from last week's the webinar, last week's webinar, that we're going to continue with the time management portion of it. And we've been doing, helping students and the parents in this domain. And we found over the last 4 years, we found there are two very consistent there are two tendencies that we see on a consistent basis. That is the parent, the consistency and the punctuality in time management. So and then that's actually not the domain, not the part that students can control. And we used to be in in-person instruction space. And so it's actually parents bring the students to our learning studio. And when the parents actually schedule their students consistently, and then bring the students to those appointments before, and build enough time to get ready and all that. And those are the students who really succeed in our coaching environment. So we wanted to share that and how they can implement it at home. Parents are saying that that they're doing it too fast or too slow, and so hopefully we will share some of the ideas that you can implement it at home to advise that. So going to the next uh, so we're going to share, China and I'm going to share some of the things that we've done in our studio, and then we will, then I will share some of the things that you can implement at home.
So the first area that we have is consistency. As Chris mentioned, when we were in person, this involved parents getting their students over to the studio consistently, and also consistency with scheduling. So it's important to have that time set aside, ideally, if possible, the same days of the week, or at least if we can't do the same days of the week, that the amount of sessions is consistent. So if your student generally is supposed to come twice a week, it's good to keep that going. When there are gaps in their scheduling, makes it a little bit harder to pick up where we left off. Student will come back and maybe they've been gone for a week, or they're coming here and there and they're like, oh, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be or what I was working on. But when they are scheduled for roughly the same number of times and per week and roughly the same days, it's mentally easier for them to manage. They know what to expect, they know what's going to happen, and they're able to prioritize themselves and get themselves ready accordingly, because they say, oh, it's Monday, this is going to be my coaching day, my Accelerate day, and I know that I'm going to be there at 5 o'clock, so I know I've got to start getting ready, get my materials ready. If a couple weeks go by and they're not scheduled, it certainly does throw off the rhythm of things, and as coaches, we right away can see that that gap that happens. I think the same thing translates in schools. Teachers talk about the lag that happens when we come back from spring break or winter break, and there's a little bit of time that's required there to catch up. So things move a lot smoother when the scheduling and the time that the students are there is pretty consistent. Chris?
Yes, so to help the consistency, so with the school, you're not really scheduling to come in, but you do have the schedule that's given to you from school and for their classrooms, and we jokingly talk about this, but it is so true that. And there are different personalities, and some people are very for some people it's very easy to follow those schedule that's given to you. For some people there's always you're the life of the party and want to have some creative things going on in between, but jokingly but not jokingly, that spontaneity it shines when there is a consistency. You can't, if there's only spontaneity, it could easily become a chaos. So so having the structure for your child and be able to communicate that in a visible way that is going to bring a lot of the stability, anticipation, and security psychologically. So the next step is, if you already have the schedules that's given to you through school, through your teachers, and print it out. A lot of times they have it stuck in somewhere in the on the website, on their teacher's Google Classroom, or learning management system. And for the younger students, even for the middle school students, that it's easier when you print it out and have them to be able to access it, and also make several copies of it, and
We lost you there, Chris.
anticipate what's coming up next. The power of routine is, we've heard that and we've benefited from it when they're younger, when they're toddler age, when they're in preschool. But it actually, the power of routine is very strong even for the later years, even in the middle school and in the high school. And I've seen that in evidence, anecdotally, that a lot of students that we work with y- uh, 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 share that story of having those routine is such a powerful thing. Another thing is, like Jimmy said, that when you schedule something that's important to you and have a value to you, you as a parent and you as a family, by later, so you can actually
Okay, since we have a little bit of freezing, Christian, could you take us over to the punctuality slide, please?
Yes.
Okay. So here at Accelerate, moving forward to our next slide, the second domain that we talk about is punctuality. So parents, as we can see, bringing their students to each lesson on time and giving them enough time to get settled and to start promptly. This is really important. Whether we're talking about coming to an Accelerate session or a Zoom session as well, giving your students, not only setting the expectation of saying, okay, hey, your class is starting in a half an hour, let's make sure that we're ready. It helps the students and your child at home as well get mentally prepared. Many students are often tasked with using other technology, or they're simply just using it for entertainment. So maybe they're watching a video or they're playing a game. It's often hard for all of us, especially children, but sometimes even as adults, for us to kind of change gears and stop what we're doing. So giving your child enough time to stop what they're doing and mentally settle down, transition, and get prepared for the next activity is really important. We ask our students to arrive no more than 15 minutes early. Sometimes they get a little excited and they're half an hour early, and I say, that's a little too early. 15 minutes is sufficient for those that might need a little bit more time to get prepared and fill out their evaluations and get settled. For some students, they're able to do this in 5 minutes, and that's enough time. So working with your child at home to find that balance and to work with them and partner to understand how much time they need is a very important step. And we encourage them come a little bit early, make sure that you've got your supplies. We kind of remind them if they've forgotten, and also talk about the value of being on time. When students are not on time, when they're starting as soon as they're arriving, as soon as the class starts, it certainly throws off the dynamic of the room, and they'll see that in the school setting as well, as the coach or the teacher needs to then stop what they're doing and start to address the student that's just arrived and go through kind of the warm-up routines of checking for supplies and greeting them. So arriving a little bit early and being prepared and ready to go is very important. And we try to support that with them at Accelerate, and we encourage you to support that as well at home. So tips, what can you do at home? All right. Help them use these support tools. And we're talking about anticipating a step ahead. As Chris was mentioning, get those schedules ready, printed, easily available for anyone to view, and start doing those planning steps ahead of time. Even talking about things the night before is helpful in saying, hey, don't forget, tomorrow this is what we have going on. So the student is ready and knows what to anticipate. Chris?
Yes, so a lot of times now that there's a synchronous learning and then asynchronous learning, and that's what we see as a pattern in a lot of this remote learning setting. So in the synchronous learning environment, they will actually do a live instruction, and they will give the students to do some activities on their own independently. And a lot of times then you have to gather and then you have to bring your attention back to the classroom, and the teacher will say that, oh, we will meet in half an hour later after you do these activities. So having those, and then we'll or I will see you in the next class in half an hour. And a lot of times they just go off and do on their own things, either play games, and some do homework right away, or the work that's given to them. But a lot of times, like, you miss the next class, or miss coming back to the classroom, joining the rest of the class and things. So a lot of parents are now using the smartphone or smart speakers. Or even their own devices have set up their own timer on them, and to remind themselves. So use the technology to support themselves to be on time and to be punctual on these things. And then as a parent, it's hard to, as a parent, we want our kids to be independent learners and be master of these habits and tricks. But it is, their brain's not developed yet, and the abilities to think abstractly is not there yet for a lot of this elementary and throughout the middle school age. So the parents support talking through, like, what will you do or what might happen step by step will be really valuable, and do some like a practice guidance. And if you are, if you want to go even further from there, not only just for the survival, but if you want to do a little deeper, is reflection on your own patterns. So when we see the students are not punctual, and in our environment, it was because parents transport them to the environment. But also we saw that when parents are not punctual, and children actually learn that behavior. So is it habit? Is it habitual? Am I modeling it? And so I would like to challenge our parents that being prepared and being on time is actually going to make a huge difference in your child's learning, because they're not hurried, they don't feel embarrassed, and they feel like they're ready to jump in. And so hopefully the parents and students are all on the same page on this. And the last item is be mindful of ending on time as well. And sometimes we see this when there are students who are extremely excited about learning, and they want to do and go more and push more. But if you do not have the ending time in mind, you always ended up pushing, and that actually becomes the habitual, oh, just 5 more minutes on this, and 2 more minutes on this, and you don't get enough rest in between. So we always make sure that in our learning studio that we end in an appropriate time, so the students get a mental break in between the two classes, and they do get really physical activities. They do go to use the restroom and drink some water and get that flow, blood flow go through your brain, so that you're ready for the freshen up and then ready for the next class. So that is something that it will help you to be ready for the next activity without being late for another one. Okay, China, would you like to explain about the procrastination part?
Sure. So our next area is, as we can see on that screen, T3, non-procrastination. And I'll just describe this quickly, that the student uses what we call ready time, and this is the prep time that we were referencing earlier, and break time. So this is between our Accelerate sessions and in the school environment, between their classes if they have a little bit of break there, without procrastination and in a timely fashion. So again, this talks about when we were referencing being organized, being prepared. If your child and you are prepared, you've discussed the schedule, you know what's coming, and now we're approaching the time that class is about to start, we want to make sure that students learn to not procrastinate with getting started. And we help them with this at the studio. When they arrive, if they're a little bit early, we kind of give them positive feedback on that, saying, hey, good job, you're here early. Have you taken care of your personal needs? And do you have your supplies with you? And in reinforcing that message, they know, they start to learn, oh, hey, my teacher's going to ask me if I've taken care of this, so I better learn to do this on my own so that I can say, yes, I have it, I'm ready, and they feel good about that. And we can do the same thing at home. Additionally, when we have a break between our sessions here at Accelerate, we encourage them to stand up, as Chris mentioned. Well, I'll say, hey, use this time, why don't you take a water break, get up, stretch your legs. I saw you were yawning during the last session, so let's get some blood flowing so that we're ready to go for the next session. And in my experience, I find that when students do that, when they take that time, as Chris mentioned, to transition away from what they were working on and say, okay, I'm done with that, I'm going to take a break and come back, and then get ready for the next class, these students are pretty successful. At the end of the session, they're able to say, you know what, I had a really good session. They feel mentally ready to learn and they're engaged, and that helps us as coaches to help them as well. So please try with your children to reinforce that at home and when they're doing their Accelerate sessions, in terms of making sure that they know what to expect so they get there on time. If you see them wrapping up and they want to go, hop on a game or something like that, that's something that in the online environment, a coach such as ours, we are here at Accelerate, we're not going to see that kind of thing. They're off camera, but certainly we want them to use that time to take a break and to get prepared, but we don't want them transitioning towards hopping on electronic or any other activity that's going to distract them and make it difficult for them to start their next session. Chris?
Yes, so some of the things that we know that in the traditional classroom environment, the teachers use this as the tools. Either they start new activities with a song or some sort of chants, and make it fun, right? So I will start with the building rituals. So it could be like if you're being on time, and give a little prize snacks or playing favorite music on the speaker or something like that, so that it's a way of coming to an activity that you can anticipate. And one of the ways that you could do is using a timer. So that timer can run as just a regular beep using a kitchen timer, or you can use that as a music or some other activities. We could remind them using these tools, but eventually we want to build an independent learning skill so that they can set up this timer and remind themselves to get there. So that they're not missing out any important activities, announcements, and things like that. And as a teacher who will do a remote learning from home, this will be one of the most challenging things when students don't show up. What are you gonna do, right? So it is some of the important things. It might not be considered as the most critical thing from home, from as a parent's perspective, but from the teacher, having the consistency is it's really important. So in the executive functioning skills, so this is one of the most important executive functioning skills, most important, but a lot of times it's missing, and it's called task inhibition. So the procrastination is not only being punctual, but to do something, that to start something, and for some students it's very difficult. So they could be punctual, they could come back onto the screen and whatnot, but I've seen some students using even water and they will drink 10 times through the different kind of straws, and they'll bring out different type of pens, and they will distract themselves to not to get started, and using the rituals and things those are the tools to kind of help them and wake up their brains and saying that it's time to move on to the next activities. And another thing that we can give them as a tools at home, if your student is having a lot more difficulties that get it started with any activities, is actually having a list of things that you need to do to get there. So things like we talked about, using the restroom or taking a water break, and even those things that as an adult, that is a given when you take a break. But for kids, having those lists. So when our kids are younger, we had a list for the morning activities. So waking up, changing your PJs, wash your face, brush your teeth, all these things, some things that you expect it to be true, and and something natural and something given. Even for those items, that if you make a list and have them to check off, it really helps them to not to be taxing on their brain another thing that I have to think about and to do. And also speaking of making a list, structured procrastination, meaning that the procrastination means that you don't want to, you're just stalling to do something that's important to you, that you have to do. So again, would you rather start with this? Would you rather do this as a list? So have that as almost like a plan B or a backup plan, to go over that scenario with your child, and saying that if you have hard time starting your homework, if you have hard time reading 10 pages a day, as given to you as an homework, would you rather start 15 minutes here, and then after dinner would you rather continue the activities? So you break it down to, and as if it's giving an option to the child, and that helps the students to feel like they are in control and they can start something small as an activity, and then expand, instead of seeing this as a big a big chunk of things that they have to tackle. For those, these two, you making a list of small items and then having a plan B, help them to understand this big, seemingly big project is actually made up of a smaller steps getting into that, and it really helps them to conceptualize that in that sense. Another thing that can help on a just regular basis is that having, instead of chores, we hate using that word because they make everyone cringe, right? So we call it home contribution. So we tell them that without you completing these contributions, our home is having a hard time functioning as a family, as a home. So giving those little activities that they can contribute to the family life will start building some agility. So start somewhere, start very small, that take the utensils out for setting up the dinner table, or just start small and then have them to wade into the bigger items and bigger understanding of how the big organization and structure works. So the last one is appropriate pacing, and I know a lot of parents are interested in learning about how to manage that.
So again, as Chris mentioned, this is our last time management domain, appropriate pacing. And our Accelerate Studio, and this would apply as well at home. This refers to a child's ability to not go too fast through their learning activity or too slow. In addition, we talk about them reviewing each topic or any missed questions or anything that they just didn't quite understand before they move on to the next learning activity. This really goes back to a topic that we covered last week on goal setting. If the student or the child has learned to set appropriate goals, they can then kind of rest and take comfort in that the goals that they have set should nicely align with the pacing that they're kind of wanting to work at for any given topic. So if they know that they're working in, let's say, multiplication this week, and they've set a goal to complete 20 questions, and they know that multiplication is fairly easy for them and they should be able to get through 20 questions with enough wiggle room for any tougher ones or ones they need help with, then as they approach these questions, they can approach them in a way that doesn't allow them to feel pressured by a time constraint of feeling like, oh, I've got to get this done in 40 minutes. I might not make it. Knowing that they've set an appropriate goal based on how they're going to work through this gives them that comfort of saying, oh, I know I can do this in the time that I have. And I even have a little extra time built in there if I have a question or if I get something wrong. At Accelerate, we monitor student pacing very carefully. We're able to, as they share their screen, observe them as they click through the answers. If we catch them, for example, a reading passage pops up and there are multiple choice questions over on the right and a reading sample on the left. And we observe that as soon as they hit that screen, they're checking their response within 5 seconds. That lets us know right away, okay, there's no way that you read that passage or even skimmed it in 5 seconds. And so we're able to back up and say, hey, why don't you go back and actually try reading that reading passage before you answer the question. And maybe the student does it, and then they answer the question. They may get it right or wrong. If they get it wrong, and they don't ask a question about that, and then they hit the second question and they follow the same pattern, we're able to kind of determine there, you're flying through for some reason. What's going on? And oftentimes we find that maybe the student is disengaged because they feel like I'm not going to get it, or I don't want to take the time to read this because I set a goal of 20 questions, and if I take this extra time to read it, I'm not going to make it. So sometimes we discover that they're chasing the goal, and the goal that they set doesn't really align with what they're working on in that moment. Other times we find that the student is moving too slowly on the opposite side because they're afraid of making mistakes. Maybe they thought that, oh, I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to get 100% today. So they are just extra vigilant, too afraid to make a mistake. And that pacing is much too slow at that point. So we try to monitor that with your students at Accelerate to determine what's happening. If the pacing is too fast, are you disengaged? Do you not understand and you're afraid to ask questions? We try to understand what are the factors that are driving the student to move too fast. And if it's too slow, we follow the same pattern of trying to understand what's going on. And please, at home, look out for that as well with your children. Look for signs of disengagement and jump in and try to understand any factors that might be causing that at home as well. Chris?
Yes. So there is always reason, and from our learning studio, it's easy for us to actually measure where they're doing too fast or too slow. I can imagine that at home sometimes if the communication with the school is not well set up and what's expected of them, and it's hard to measure. So having an appropriate data, like how we measure our students, is very important. And again, that brings the topic of setting the goals and meeting the goals and reflection. Those are very, very important to be able to measure this data. So I mentioned of using the kitchen timer, and I'm going to actually show this, something like this that we have been using it at home. And so to keep it at not too fast and not too slow, a lot of times, and we hear this quite often, that my kids finish their work so fast, and when I look at it, it's just not quality. How can I help them? So set up a certain time frame. So we usually say for each grade for an hour or two. For first grade, 10 minutes, and second grade for 20 minutes, and so on, to get their work done. And you as a parent, if you keep on setting the goals and reflecting, that you will know for certain things how long it should take, and set that time, and talk to your child about the expectations. And if they finish early, so within the time more than the day, actually set it up as a kitchen timer, then use those as a reading time, or something like that, so that there will be, you will have to have a list of things that they can do as an option when they get things done early. That way, that will help them if they don't want to spend time reading or some other things that you already have. So they do finish things with a very sloppy work a lot of times, because the goal is for them to finish early and do something else. And instead of having that something else as an open option, if you should keep a list of things that when you're done early, these are the things that you can and need to do first, and access those first. And then if you're done with that, within that time, then you should go back to your original activities, or the classroom or schoolwork and whatnot, and have an overarching rules of during the school days and during your e-learning time, even though you're not at school, that you work as if you're in school and devote your time to do these things. And it's very tempting to access different games and whatnot, but like Jimmy shared earlier, having to do those multitasking and switching back and forth is going to really affect them, their attentions and their motivation. So we try to really keep it as contained in time, so that they can measure how fast or slow they're doing. When they're going too slow, then that also means that there's some underlying issues, and again, procrastination, or distraction, or fear of making mistakes. But also it could be they're placed in a more challenging level than they should. So that's a part that you will have to probably consult with your teacher, that whether your child is at a, given some materials that it's too challenging for them, and then they just give up. They give up, and then it's just taking forever, or it could shown as a too fast, because they will do whatever you think it is, and then just not really being totally engaged in it. So the simple kitchen timer exercise, like I said, you will need to have some sort of a list of things when you're done early, and when you're done early with your school items, and the student will have to access those list of things first, until that set time is done. So this was like a really easy, simple thing. I couldn't really find those type of kitchen timer that's showing on here anymore, but that was simple enough to use. So so we're going to wrap this up with all 4 items that help you with managing the time. And all these 4 things: consistency, punctuality, and the non-procrastination, and appropriate pacing, all those 4 items will help your child and yourself to understand the time is limited. It's a commodity, and it's relative, and all those principles we talked about earlier, and hope that it will give some tips and actual tools that you could use it at home. So we're moving on to the Q&A part. If there's any questions, please let us know. So Jimmy, so some of the questions that I get a lot from the parents is, what should I do to help my kids stay on time, and they get bored with e-learning and rush to finish and do other things online? We hear that all the time, and we mentioned a few items last time. I'm sorry, during this webinar and last time as well. Do you have any tips?
So please, just the other day, our kids have, you know, so one of the tips that we have is to, again, use the kitchen timer. And, we heard from our kids that one of the things that their peers do in class is that they rush through to get the assignment done as soon as possible, so that uh, so that they can jump onto another tab or another activity and try to get that done as so there's a reward at the end of finishing something. So that is an incentive for them to finish and run through something. So the tip that we give the kids is, first of all, we set the right expectations about what is allowed and what is not allowed. So for example, we have the kids not to open up the tab, and that is an agreement that we have before we even begin. And so that way, when they finish something, I guess the desire to jump onto another tab is not as readily accessible, but instead we give them alternatives like reading a book or doing other activities.
All right. So if you don't have any more questions, there's a daily success plan that we can give it out as a free, and that you will receive an email. You can also get the recording of this webinar. The next one is about note-taking and organization. I know parents have a lot of questions about those items. And that will conclude our webinar today.
All right. And I will stop recording. Let's go. Where's the Facebook? And gotta figure out how to come down from Facebook Live. No. Oh, here we go. And okay. We're off. We're off Facebook.